The executioner's blade hovered just inches from the soldier's neck, its edge glinting under the arena's brutal lights, and in that breathless instant, a single voice crackled over every speaker, mocking, casual, sharp enough to slice the tension itself. "You're about to execute the wrong species." The entire crowd froze, the executioner froze, the cameras froze, and every executioner commander watching from their control rooms felt a cold spike of fear before a new message flickered onto their command screens, one word glowing red: ghost. The day had begun with routine violence. Earth soldiers had been caught in the maze of Sigma Verge after what was supposed to be a precision extraction. They were an elite team, hardened, sarcastic, cynical enough to joke even as they were surrounded. The commanding officer, Captain Blake, had muttered dryly as they were pinned between a canyon wall and 3 armored transport tanks. "Well, boys, if anyone has a magic exit button, now's the time." His second-in-command chuckled bitterly. "I left mine back at base, sir." Their humor was forced but real, a last thread holding morale together as executioner units moved in like wolves closing on tired prey. The trap was clinical, perfect, executed without waste or mercy. Plasma nets descended from above. Kinetic suppressors locked their limbs. Their weapons were seized in under 3 minutes, their helmets stripped from their heads to humiliate them before the hovering drone cameras that transmitted this failure live to every corner of the galactic network. Even as Captain Blake's face was shoved into the dirt, he lifted his gaze to the nearest executioner commander and spat with a half-smile. "Enjoy the show, freak. The ticket price is higher than you think." But his bravado could not conceal the truth. They were captured, broken, and about to be made an example of. The alien public had gathered in unprecedented numbers for the scheduled execution. The Galactic Arena itself was a monstrous, shining testament to cruelty, its tiers packed with spectators from dozens of species, all eager to watch Earth's finest kneel in chains before the executioner blades. Above them, hanging banners displayed the names and kill counts of the executioners who would perform the public beheadings, as though it were sport. The executioner high commander stood proudly, delivering a speech filled with mockery and declarations of alien superiority, his voice booming in several languages at once. "Earth has learned its place. These soldiers represent the last hope of your primitive species. And today, we snuff out that hope with ceremony." On Earth, the scene played live on every major network. Civilians watched in horror, families of the captured soldiers watched with trembling hands over their mouths, and inside Earth's Central Military Command, a deep silence settled over the highest brass. No one spoke, no one moved, as the executioner's blade was raised over Blake's exposed neck. Then, at the precise moment that blade began its downward arc, a general at the back of the war room reached under the table and pressed an ancient, dust-covered switch. A signal left Earth that instant. Short, sharp, and carrying no explanation. Somewhere far below Earth's surface, deep in a bunker where no cameras were permitted, a man sitting in near darkness opened one eye as the signal arrived. His face was unreadable, half-shadowed, older than expected but with a posture of absolute readiness. He rose, calmly brushing dust from his clothes, and looked at the small, battered device that had flashed green on the wall. Ghost Protocol. Greenlit. In the arena, the executioners felt the shift before anyone else. The air seemed suddenly heavier. The bright lights flickered once. A faint audio feedback crackled through their comms. Then came the voice, smooth, amused, unmistakably human, overriding every broadcast channel. "You're about to execute the wrong species." Every alien head turned upward in collective dread as the main viewing screens, which had been showing the bound Earth soldiers, abruptly changed to show a single image, a shadowed figure standing over a field of dead executioners. The image was grainy, old, and carried a reputation whispered even in alien officer academies: Earth's Ghost Operative, a name spoken with genuine fear. The High Commander barked orders to find the source of the signal, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Across the arena, alien civilians began murmuring, unsure whether this was part of the execution show or something far worse. In the executioner fortress nearby, sirens began to blare. Internal systems detected breaches where no breaches should have been possible. Camera feeds began dropping one by one, replaced by that same image of the shadowy figure. Ghost. Captain Blake, kneeling with the blade still poised above his neck, tilted his head slightly, an exhausted grin flickering onto his dirt-smeared face. "Told you," he whispered. The executioner nearest to him snarled in rage and yanked him up roughly, but his eyes were darting nervously to every corner of the arena, searching for threats he could not see. The view cut briefly to the inside of the executioner's own command center, where armored operators were scrambling in panic. Systems were failing rapidly. Control panels sparked and died. The fortress' automated defenses turned inward, targeting their own patrols. A section of the hangar exploded violently from within as a small shuttle disintegrated, a shuttle they themselves had secured just hours earlier. It hadn't been a prisoner transport. It had been a Trojan horse. Back in the arena, a subtle change rolled across the audience. Where moments before they had been cheering and jeering, now they sat frozen, watching the spectacle twist into something far darker than public entertainment. The blade still hovered in the executioner's grasp, but the execution itself felt suddenly impossible, like trying to complete a ritual under the gaze of a predator. One by one, executioner commanders across their empire began issuing desperate encrypted orders: find the ghost, terminate with extreme prejudice. But even they knew it was too late. The human soldiers chained at the arena center exchanged glances, an old camaraderie and hope flickering back into their eyes. Somewhere, out there in the alien shadows, their nightmare had just become the alien's nightmare. The last shot of that moment, broadcast live to 1,000 worlds, was not of an execution. It was a freeze-frame image of the ghost insignia burned into a wall inside the executioner's own fortress, fresh smoke still curling around the mark. No signature, no explanation. Just the haunting reminder that Earth's deadliest asset had entered the field, and everything had changed. The chapter closed with that tension hanging in the air, and Captain Blake laughing softly from his knees, muttering under his breath so only his men could hear. They thought this was going to be a show. They just bought front-row seats to their funeral. The fortress at Sigma Verge stood as a grim monument to brutality, its jagged spires and armored walls bristling with sentry towers and automated defense systems. It was said that no one had ever infiltrated its depths and lived to speak of it, but that reputation was precisely why Ghost had chosen it as his entry point. Not a conventional entry, of course. As the alien guards scrambled in confusion, Ghost moved among them unseen, having slipped into the chaos immediately after detonating the shuttle in the hangar. That blast had been more than just a diversion. It had severed a critical data relay feeding sensor telemetry back to command, blinding them in their own stronghold. The executioners still believed they held the advantage, that their fortress was impenetrable, but the reality was far worse than their fear imagined. Ghost wasn't just inside. He had turned their fortress into his hunting ground. The first squad he encountered didn't even see him. He moved with an effortless grace that belied the lethality hidden beneath his simple tactical gear. Unlike the heavy armored plating favored by Earth's special forces, Ghost wore flexible fabric armor that hugged his form without restricting movement. As he passed the squad, a flick of his wrist activated a silent EMP charge that dropped their weapons dead before they could raise them, and a heartbeat later they were down, throats crushed, pulse stopped, eyes wide in confusion as they collapsed to the ground. Ghost didn't pause to gloat or reflect. He moved on, already anticipating where the next patrol would appear. His mind worked like a machine, calculating angles, gaps in sensor sweeps, guard rotations, and entry points. Every step forward was a step deeper into the executioner's web, except that web was collapsing from the inside out, and they hadn't even realized it. In the control rooms high above the arena, executioner commanders barked contradictory orders as alerts poured in from across the fortress. Their communications arrays flickered with static, cameras went dark, and squad after squad fell silent. The Fortress AI, an advanced combat system designed to predict and repel intrusions, was malfunctioning in strange ways, doors locking randomly, targeting systems aiming at empty corridors, security fields flickering in and out of existence. What none of them understood was that Ghost was already interfacing with the core systems directly, his wrist terminal running a silent override program that injected subtle chaos into every line of code. Not enough to trigger immediate alarms. Just enough to make every decision the executioners made slower, less precise, more desperate. Elsewhere, the captured Earth soldiers sat in their cells, staring grimly at the walls, resigned to their fate even after hearing Ghost's broadcast. They didn't dare hope, not yet. Too many things could go wrong, and they had no way of knowing what was really happening out there. But Captain Blake allowed himself a small smile anyway. He recognized the tone of that voice when it broke through the execution broadcast, casual, sardonic, with just the right edge of menace. Ghost. That name carried weight, not because of official records, there were none, but because of whispered stories that circulated among Earth's Black Ops units. Stories of impossible missions, of whole battalions disappearing overnight, of a single operative toppling regimes without leaving fingerprints. If Ghost was here, the rules had changed. Back inside the fortress, Ghost crouched at a junction where two wide corridors met. He reached into a pouch at his side and retrieved a tiny device no larger than a coin. He flicked it onto the floor and pressed a single button. In an instant, the device projected a lifelike hologram of himself running down one corridor, weapon raised, sprinting for cover. Predictably, an entire squad of executioners immediately fell for the bait, chasing the false image at full speed. Ghost waited exactly 3 seconds after they passed, then slipped silently into the opposite corridor, heading straight for the prison block. His movements were precise but effortless, as if he had rehearsed this infiltration 100 times in his mind. He had, of course. Ghost made a habit of studying every detail of a target before ever setting foot inside. The executioners prided themselves on unpredictability, but Ghost thrived on structure. Every fortress had weaknesses, and this one had more than most. He entered a narrow maintenance shaft, moving swiftly but carefully. From this cramped crawlspace, he could hear the faint sounds of panic through the walls, the heavy boots of alien guards running, the clipped voices on malfunctioning radios, the distant roar of a frustrated commander demanding answers. Ghost paused briefly as he reached a small junction panel. He removed a thin tool from his belt and worked quickly, rewiring the panel's connection to the prison wing's security grid. With a few deft flicks of his fingers, he bypassed the automated locks on every cell door holding Earth soldiers. He smiled faintly as he did it, whispering under his breath, "Jailbreak initiated." In the prison block, cell doors hissed open one by one. The soldiers inside froze, unsure if this was a trick. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the corridor, Ghost emerged, walking casually as if he owned the place, a sidearm in one hand and a keycard in the other. His voice was low but carried easily to every ear, dripping with calm confidence. "You boys ready for a jailbreak, or would you prefer to finish your nap first?" Blake laughed despite himself, standing slowly and shaking out his stiff shoulders. "About damn time," he muttered. The other soldiers rose quickly, adrenaline rushing back into their veins as Ghost tossed them each a weapon, casually picked up from fallen executioners. As the soldiers armed themselves, alarms blared louder than ever before. The executioners had finally figured out what was happening, or at least that something was happening. Red emergency lights bathed the prison block in a harsh glow as Ghost led the men forward, directing them with quick, precise hand signals. They moved as one, falling easily back into combat formation despite their exhaustion and injuries. But none of them questioned Ghost's authority. They followed him instinctively, as if he were the natural center of gravity in this collapsing nightmare. And behind them, the prison block doors sealed shut once more, locking the executioners out and buying precious minutes. Ghost's mind raced ahead, calculating next moves. He didn't just intend to extract these men. He intended to burn the entire fortress to the ground on his way out, leaving no trace, no survivors, and no doubt in the minds of every alien watching. Earth's Ghost had arrived, and no one was safe. The executioners regrouped fast, faster than any ordinary military force, their discipline razor-sharp even amid confusion. But discipline meant little when their opponent rewrote the battlefield itself. As Ghost led the soldiers through narrow industrial corridors lit by flickering red emergency lights, the fortress's internal defenses kept failing in eerie synchronization with his movements. A heavy blast door that should have sealed shut suddenly jammed halfway open just long enough for them to slip through. Automated turrets that would have cut them down spun helplessly in circles, their targeting systems blinded by a virus Ghost had quietly introduced hours before his arrival. Every step felt like a dance choreographed perfectly by a mind that saw every move before it happened. But this was not luck or chance. This was Ghost's battlefield now. The soldiers moved with growing confidence, the tightness in their shoulders easing slightly as they realized that Ghost was doing far more than simply guiding them. He was manipulating every sensor, every alarm, every system within this supposedly impenetrable fortress. Captain Blake fell into step beside him, eyes narrowed but tinged with reluctant admiration. Blake asked quietly, almost like a man trying to confirm that a myth was real, "You were already inside before we got captured, weren't you?" Ghost's expression barely shifted, but the corner of his mouth curled up just slightly, and he replied in that same dry tone that had haunted enemy commanders for decades, "That's classified, Captain." The soldiers chuckled despite the danger, the absurdity of it all giving them a grim kind of joy. That fragile humor evaporated as they reached a wide corridor leading toward the upper decks. A towering figure stepped from the shadows ahead, and even Ghost paused for a fraction of a second. The executioner elite had arrived. Nearly 8 feet tall, clad in jet-black armor that absorbed the emergency lights into a matte void, its helmet shaped into a grim parody of a human skull. This was no ordinary soldier. This was the executioner's answer to urban legends like Ghost, a living weapon designed specifically to counter infiltration operatives. The soldiers froze instinctively, gripping their weapons tighter as dread settled over them. But Ghost simply stepped forward, tilting his head as if studying a specimen, his voice low and amused as he spoke. "I wondered when they'd send you." The elite didn't waste time on threats or speeches. It surged forward with terrifying speed, an energy blade igniting from its right gauntlet as it slashed toward Ghost in a blur of motion. Ghost barely sidestepped, his movement precise, economical, almost casual, and then he ducked low and spun, firing 2 quick shots at the elite's exposed knee joints. Sparks flew, but the armor held, deflecting the rounds harmlessly. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Ghost held up a hand sharply, his eyes never leaving the towering figure in front of him. This fight was his alone. The 2 combatants circled each other, predator and predator, each testing the other's reflexes and limits. The elite lunged again, striking with brutal efficiency, but Ghost was already moving before each strike landed, weaving through attacks with the fluid grace of a dancer. The soldiers watched, their hearts in their throats, as Ghost closed the distance suddenly, flipping a small device from his belt and slapping it onto the elite's chest. A concussive blast erupted, staggering the massive figure backward, but still it did not fall. A voice crackled over the executioner comms, loud enough that even the humans could hear it, warning that reinforcements were inbound, closing fast. The corridor would be a kill box within seconds unless they moved now. But Ghost wasn't finished. He drew a combat knife from his shoulder harness and advanced again, fast, brutal, no wasted motion. He ducked under a desperate slash, pivoted behind the elite, and drove the blade between the overlapping plates at the back of its neck. There was a sickening crunch, a burst of sparks, and the elite finally crashed to the floor in a heap of dead metal and organic tissue. Ghost turned without fanfare, his voice calm as ever as he gestured to the soldiers, "Let's move." Blake was the first to recover, his adrenaline spiking as they sprinted after their guide. Behind them, the corridor began to fill with executioner troops pouring in from side tunnels, but every passage they tried was sealed by Ghost's earlier sabotage. Their elite warrior, built to stop Earth's most dangerous human, now lay broken at their feet, a symbol that even their worst nightmares could not stop what was coming. They reached an access elevator but found it locked down. Ghost barely paused. He opened a side panel and with quick flicks of his fingers rewired it, bypassing alien encryption as if it were a child's puzzle. As the doors slid open, Blake couldn't help himself. "You trained for this kind of thing your whole life, didn't you?" Ghost shot him a sideways glance as they piled inside the elevator and simply said, "I trained for this before anyone even knew this could happen." It wasn't arrogance. It was fact. As the elevator began to rise toward the arena above, Ghost's wrist terminal pulsed with warnings. The executioners had finally grasped what they were up against. They were abandoning standard tactics, flooding the upper decks with every soldier they had left. The fortress was transforming into a trap again, this time designed for one man. But Ghost was already a step ahead. He raised his terminal and tapped a sequence that activated a hidden program he had planted long ago, a psychological warfare script designed not just to disrupt but to terrify. Across the fortress's entire comms network, Ghost's voice began broadcasting simultaneously, his tone low, cold, and threaded with dark humor. Multiple incursions detected. Internal security failure. Perimeter breach is imminent. The message looped endlessly, blending truth with lies, sowing chaos into their ranks. Executioner officers barked orders over each other, troops retreated from sections where no attackers existed, and the entire structure fell into disarray. The soldiers surrounding Ghost in the elevator began to understand the scale of the deception. There was no Earth invasion force coming. Ghost was alone. Every alarm, every panic order, every misfired turret was his doing. The elevator doors opened onto a ruined observation deck overlooking the arena. Smoke and debris filled the air. Ghost stepped out first, scanning the carnage below, the chained execution stage now abandoned in terror as executioners rushed to contain what they thought was an entire army. But it was only him, manipulating every inch of their fortress while walking through it in plain sight. Blake approached him carefully, still trying to grasp it all. "What are you really?" he asked quietly. Ghost didn't answer directly. Instead, he raised his weapon and checked the magazine, speaking almost as an afterthought. "I'm what happens when you corner Earth and forget that sometimes one man is all it takes." The chapter closed as Ghost led the soldiers across the deck, moving toward their final target, their extraction point still far above but already within reach, the executioner's fortress collapsing into chaos with every step he took. The moment they reached the far end of the observation deck, the gravity of Ghost's plan began to reveal itself in chilling detail. The soldiers expected a simple breakout, a desperate fight to the extraction shuttle at best. But what unfolded next defied even their most hardened imaginations. Ghost didn't lead them directly to an exit. Instead, he directed them toward the main control center of the entire fortress, deep within a labyrinth of corridors and stairwells that twisted and turned back toward the very heart of enemy territory. Blake hesitated for a second, realizing the direction they were moving in, his voice low and filled with disbelief as he asked, "Why the hell are we going back toward their command core?" Ghost glanced over his shoulder with that same infuriating calm and replied, "Because this isn't just an escape. This is a message." Every step felt heavier as they moved deeper into the fortress, past locked doors that inexplicably slid open at Ghost's command, past executioner officers who froze mid-step when they recognized him, only to fall dead before they could raise their weapons. The soldiers followed closely, moving like a shadow force in Ghost's wake, no longer questioning his decisions. His confidence was absolute, infectious even. When they finally breached the doors to the main command center, they found it already in chaos. Dozens of executioner commanders stood at consoles issuing frantic commands to units all over the fortress, unaware of the trap that had already been sprung around them. The sight that greeted them was absurdly perfect. The executioner high commander himself stood at the center of the room, his back turned, shouting orders at his staff, completely oblivious to the fact that Ghost was already inside. The soldiers took up positions instinctively, ready for a firefight, but Ghost raised a hand sharply to hold them back. Then, with unnerving calm, he walked straight up behind the High Commander and tapped the armored shoulder. The alien froze instantly, his voice dying mid-sentence. Slowly, he turned, his grotesque face contorting in shock as he came face to face with the very figure whose insignia was now seared into every failed security monitor in the building. Ghost spoke first, his voice a dry whisper that nevertheless carried to every ear in the room. "I believe you have something of mine." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then Ghost raised a compact device in one hand and activated it. Instantly, every screen in the room changed, showing live feeds of the arena, the cells, the hangar bays. All the prisoners were gone. The executioner's most secure facility had been emptied right under their noses. On another monitor, the executioner elite lay dead where it had fallen. On yet another, entire weapon caches were shown detonating in sequence, reduced to flaming debris. It was psychological warfare at its purest form. Ghost wasn't just defeating them physically. He was dismantling their pride, their reputation, their aura of invincibility. He turned toward the soldiers now, his voice cutting through the silence as he instructed them to escort the High Commander. The soldiers hesitated, confused. Escort him where? Ghost's expression darkened slightly, and he simply said to the arena. Realization dawned on them slowly, followed by grim smiles. The executioners had prepared a grand execution spectacle to humiliate Earth's soldiers. Now Ghost intended to flip that spectacle on its head in front of the entire galaxy. The walk to the arena was surreal. The executioner High Commander was dragged in chains down the very corridors where his soldiers had marched their captives only hours earlier. The few remaining guards who saw this sight froze in shock, lowering their weapons automatically as if unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The human soldiers moved confidently now, their posture straightened, the shame of their earlier capture burned away by Ghost's audacious reversal. When they reached the grand entrance to the arena, Ghost paused briefly, tapping a small control on his wrist device. Across the galaxy, every broadcast feed that had been covering the planned execution suddenly shifted to this new scene. Billions of viewers who had tuned in to watch the humiliation of Earth's finest now watched something no one could have predicted. The cameras zoomed in as the executioner High Commander was dragged to the center of the arena stage, and chained exactly where Blake had knelt hours earlier. Ghost walked slowly to the edge of the stage, standing beneath the towering banners that celebrated executioner victories and war crimes alike. Without a word, he drew his sidearm and fired a single shot, severing the largest banner so it fell to the floor at his feet. Then he spoke directly to the camera feed, his voice as calm as ever but carrying an edge that no one could mistake. Today's entertainment brought to you by human improvisation. He gestured grandly to the chained executioner leader and continued, and I hope you're enjoying the show, because it's about to get very interesting. All around them, alien spectators sat frozen in their seats, their earlier bloodthirsty jeering replaced by silence, shock, and growing dread. Ghost turned his attention back to his wrist device and with a few quick commands, revealed to the world the extent of his infiltration. Security footage showing the dead elite, destroyed weapon stockpiles, the sabotaged fortress systems, and hacked communication channels all played one after the other across every monitor in the arena. Ghost's coup was complete. He wasn't merely freeing captured soldiers. He was dismantling the very image of executioner supremacy before a galactic audience. Then came the final act. With deliberate precision, Ghost activated a final sequence on his device. Hidden charges planted throughout the arena infrastructure began flashing silently, unnoticed by the panicking executioner officers in the stands. Ghost spoke one last time before the broadcast feed cut out completely. This will be your final show. The moment the last word left his lips, the charges began to detonate in perfect sequence. Support beams crumbled, lighting rigs collapsed, and entire sections of seating imploded inward. Dust and fire filled the air as chaos erupted among the alien spectators who had gathered to witness Earth's humiliation and were now witnessing their own instead. In the confusion, Ghost led the human soldiers swiftly toward the fortress's upper exit tunnels. The detonations weren't designed just for spectacle. They were a cover, a distraction, and a trap all rolled into one, ensuring that no coordinated counterattack could form before Ghost and his team reached the extraction point. As they ran, the soldiers could hear alien voices screaming in terror behind them, the sound blending with the roar of collapsing steel and stone. At no point did Ghost rush. His pace was steady, his mind several steps ahead even as the fortress fell around them. Every corner they turned had been pre-planned. Every fallback route accounted for. When they reached the final blast door separating them from the landing platform, Ghost didn't even hesitate. He tapped his wrist device once and the door slid open smoothly, revealing the extraction shuttle waiting, engines already primed. The shuttle banked hard as it lifted away from the wreckage of Sigma Verge, flames and smoke curling toward the alien sky in vast plumes that could be seen from orbit. Inside, the soldiers sat in stunned silence, the hum of the engines barely registering over the adrenaline still pounding in their veins. No one spoke for long minutes, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Ghost sat near the front, calm as ever, head slightly tilted as he watched the monitors tracking their ascent. His face gave away nothing, but Blake, seated directly across from him, could see the calculations still behind those eyes. Ghost wasn't finished. This wasn't over yet. The destruction of the arena and the collapse of the Executioner Fortress had bought them time but not safety. Every Executioner warship in the sector would already be scrambling toward them, their sensors reaching hungrily through space, searching for the fleeing shuttle like hounds on a scent. They would not stop. They would not forgive what had been done. Ghost tapped a control panel beside him, accessing the shuttle's navigational systems. On the screen appeared dozens of potential escape vectors, plotted and replot in real time. Most of them were already blocked or compromised, the executioners closing the net faster than even Earth's military had predicted. Blake leaned forward, lowering his voice so the other soldiers couldn't hear. "What's the plan now?" Ghost didn't look up as he answered simply and without a hint of hesitation. "We're not running." The words landed like a shockwave. Blake blinked, uncertain if he'd heard correctly. Before he could ask what Ghost meant, the operative added quietly, "The exit shuttle is just phase 1. The soldiers think we're heading home. They don't know that home isn't safe yet. Not while the Executioner Flagship is still out there." As if on cue, the monitors flickered, showing an incoming contact. The Executioner Flagship had broken from its patrol route and was now accelerating hard, cutting across intercept vectors, calculating exactly where Ghost's shuttle would emerge. It was massive, bristling with weapon arrays, a fortress in its own right. Its mere presence in the sector had kept Sigma Verge secure for decades, a guardian that no sane enemy would ever dare challenge directly. But Ghost was no ordinary enemy. He rose from his seat, issuing a quiet command to the pilot to maintain course. Then he stepped toward the rear of the shuttle where a crate sat secured to the floor. The crate had been loaded before the mission even began, part of the plan all along, though no one except Ghost himself knew what it contained. With casual precision, Ghost cracked open the crate, revealing its contents to Blake and anyone else watching. Inside were components of an anti-ship warhead, compact but devastating, designed specifically for close proximity detonation. Blake's eyes widened as realization struck him. "You're not serious." Ghost finally allowed a faint smile to cross his face as he assembled the device with practiced efficiency. "Dead serious. The executioners have to learn that there are consequences." Blake felt a strange chill run through him. Ghost wasn't improvising any of this. He'd intended from the start not just to rescue the prisoners but to end the Executioner Flagship itself, an act so bold, so impossible, that no one could have imagined it until it was too late. The shuttle's autopilot chimed softly as it adjusted course, descending rapidly toward what appeared to be an abandoned mining platform drifting near a debris field. Ghost spoke over his shoulder as he worked. "This is where we split." The soldiers looked at each other, confused, but Ghost's authority remained absolute. He explained quickly. "The shuttle is a decoy now. I'm transferring you to an emergency escape pod in the debris field. The executioners will focus on the shuttle, assuming I'm on board. The pod will drift silently past them while I deliver this." He held up the completed warhead, its arming light glowing a steady, ominous red. Blake started to protest, but Ghost cut him off with a glance, a flicker of humor in his voice. "You can't argue with the dead, Captain. It's already done." Blake understood then, truly understood, that Ghost didn't expect to survive. This was a one-way mission from the very start. Ghost was giving the executioners the kind of message that could not be ignored, the kind that burned itself into history. The kind that demanded a sacrifice. In the minutes that followed, Ghost herded the soldiers into the escape pod with clinical efficiency, overriding the few weak protests they raised. The pod was small, dark, stripped of every luxury, but it would keep them alive and hidden. As the hatch sealed, Blake gave Ghost one final look, meeting those cold, calculating eyes that nevertheless carried an undeniable glint of pride. Then, without ceremony, Ghost pressed the launch control and the pod jettisoned silently into the debris field. Back in the shuttle, Ghost sat alone at the helm as the Executioner flagship loomed ever closer, its weapons locking onto his craft from extreme range. He could almost feel their hunger, their rage, their certainty that they had cornered him at last. He activated a final communications channel, broadcasting directly to the Executioner bridge. His voice was calm, amused, even playful as he spoke. "You've spent decades making examples of others. You've ruled by fear, by execution, by spectacle. But today is my show." The Executioner commander's reply was a burst of static-filled fury, demanding his surrender, threatening unimaginable punishments. Ghost only laughed softly. Too late for that. Then, without warning, he throttled the shuttle hard, accelerating directly toward the flagship's bow. The warhead was already armed, the detonation sequence locked and counting down. The Executioners, for all their arrogance, realized too late what was happening. Their weapons fired, scoring direct hits that shredded the shuttle's hull, but Ghost's trajectory didn't waver. The shuttle became a blazing comet of debris and fire, a spear hurled straight into the heart of their invincible flagship. At the final moment, as the shuttle breached their forward hangar bay, Ghost whispered one last phrase into his comms, meant only for Earth's records. "Target delivered. Mission complete." And then the warhead detonated. The explosion was cataclysmic. It didn't merely cripple the Executioner flagship. It cracked its spine, ruptured its reactors, and tore the ship apart from within. Across the debris field, the escape pod tumbled silently, buffeted by shockwaves but intact. Inside, Blake and the other soldiers watched in awe and disbelief as the giant warship that had symbolized their enemy's dominance for so long disintegrated before their eyes. No one cheered. The loss was too fresh, too raw. But every one of them understood that they owed their lives to the man who had stayed behind. Earth's Ghost. A man who had become legend not by medals or parades but by doing what no one else could or would. When the escape pod finally touched down on a remote Earth outpost far from any civilian settlement, the soldiers stumbled out into the cool night air, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. They were alive, but there was no celebration, no cheering, no parades waiting for them. The moment felt heavy and muted, weighed down by the absence of the man who had made their survival possible. Captain Blake stood apart from his men for a long moment, staring up at the stars where the Executioner flagship had once ruled unchallenged, now reduced to scattered wreckage floating across light years. In that quiet sky, there was no sign of Ghost's sacrifice, no lingering trace of the man who had planned every step, who had rewritten the rules of war with nothing but precision, audacity, and a cold, brilliant mind. The others gave Blake space, recognizing in his silence a shared grief and awe that words could not express. The debriefing that followed was swift but somber. Earth's military intelligence officers listened carefully as the soldiers recounted every detail of their escape, every twist of Ghost's plan, every maneuver he had orchestrated with almost supernatural foresight. The officers asked few questions. There was very little to ask. The story spoke for itself. The surviving soldiers had walked out of an alien fortress that was never meant to be breached. They had witnessed a man dismantle the most feared military organization in the galaxy, and destroy their flagship with nothing but a stolen shuttle and a single warhead. But what struck everyone most deeply was the truth that Ghost had been working alone, without backup, without an extraction plan, without expectation of survival. He had never intended to come home. Blake sat through the entire debrief without speaking until the very end, when one of the intelligence officials asked him the question everyone wanted answered. Who was Ghost really? Blake hesitated for a long moment, then smiled faintly, shaking his head. It doesn't matter, he said finally. He's whoever we needed him to be. And right now, he's the reason we're still here. The official nodded and closed the file, and that was the end of the formal record. Ghost's name was never mentioned again in any official capacity. There would be no medals, no monuments, no public acknowledgement. His actions, by design, would remain unspoken in the halls of power. But within the small circles that mattered, the soldiers who had lived because of him and the few commanders who understood what had really happened, the legend was alive and growing. Word spread slowly at first, as rumors do, whispered among Earth's covert operators and frontline soldiers, then drifting outward across space to colonies and distant outposts. The story of Earth's ghost took on a life of its own, growing larger with each telling. Some said he had never truly existed, that he was an invention of Earth's propaganda machine. Others swore they had seen him with their own eyes in some past battle, moving through the shadows, untouchable and lethal. Among alien worlds, fear took hold in a different way. Across executioner-controlled systems, commanders began reinforcing their fortresses with paranoid urgency, adding extra layers of security, new codes, additional surveillance. But none of them could sleep easily. They all remembered the image burned into their screens during the final moments of the Sigma Verge broadcast. The image of a lone figure standing calmly as their fortress crumbled around him. Ghost had become more than a man. He had become a symbol of Earth's refusal to submit. In the galactic underworld, his name carried a different weight entirely. Criminal syndicates and alien mercenaries began telling stories of entire war bands that had simply vanished after crossing paths with Ghost. Pirate fleets that had once preyed on human shipping routes began rerouting their operations, avoiding even the most remote Earth colonies. Even among Earth's enemies, there was a growing respect for the myth, a grim acknowledgement that humans might seem fragile, outnumbered, and outgunned, but somewhere out there, among them, moved an operator who did not play by anyone's rules. Ghost was proof that Earth was capable of striking back in ways that no enemy could predict or counter. For the soldiers Ghost had saved, life slowly resumed a strange kind of normalcy. They were decorated quietly, their records sealed, their testimonies classified. But each of them carried something more valuable than medals or citations. They carried the knowledge that they had stood beside a man who operated on an entirely different level of warfare. A man who had seen the whole battlefield from beginning to end before he even took his first step. And they carried the unspoken promise that if Earth was ever cornered again, if the situation ever became truly desperate, another message would go out into the darkness. Another call would be made, and somewhere, somehow, Ghost would answer. Months passed. Then a year. The galaxy moved on, wars flared and died in other sectors, new powers rose and fell. The executioners rebuilt their fleet, but they never fully recovered from the psychological blow dealt at Sigma Verge. The memory of that humiliation remained, a scar that no amount of armor or firepower could erase. Their commanders drilled their soldiers harder, made their fortresses even more secure, and continued to speak of Ghost in bitter, fearful tones. Their recruitment propaganda, once proud and boastful, now carried a nervous undertone, as if they themselves were trying to convince their own people that they still held power. Back on Earth, deep beneath the surface in a bunker so hidden that not even the highest-ranking generals had access without clearance, a single screen flickered to life. It had remained dark since the moment Ghost's shuttle detonated. No one had touched it since. The dust on its surface was thick, undisturbed. And yet, without warning, a green light blinked on. Then a coded message appeared in a language so obscure that only a handful of operatives could understand it. The message was short, simple, and chilling in its implication. Standing by. No name, no signature. Just those two words. Elsewhere, on a distant colony world far from Earth's influence, a man walked into a quiet tavern, his features obscured beneath a simple hood, his posture unremarkable, his presence invisible. He sat at the bar, ordered a cheap drink, and listened carefully as the patrons around him spoke of rumors and conflicts, and new threats brewing in the outer sectors. He smiled faintly to himself as he sipped the drink, his eyes scanning the crowd for signs of trouble. No one recognized him. No one even noticed him. But if anyone had looked closely, if anyone had paid attention to the way he moved, they might have recognized the way his hands rested near his belt, the way his gaze measured every exit, every face, every potential threat. The Ghost wasn't dead. He had never intended to die. The mission at Sigma Verge had been a message, but it wasn't his last. Earth's enemies had learned fear, but they hadn't learned the most important lesson yet. That Earth's ghost didn't vanish. He waited. He watched. And when the time came again, when the next threat emerged, he would be there, moving unseen, striking without warning, and reminding the galaxy one more time that some legends never die.